LeadHers, it is Christine Love, and I am here with your May 2013 LeadHer local teaching on the topic of patience. Not an easy topic for any of us to discuss, and I'm sure as many of you know, it's one that I've even been a little fearful to teach on, because what happens when we start to dig into patience or pray for patience or get ready to teach on patience? God often gives us many opportunities to practice patience, and such was the case as I was getting ready for this teaching. So I really hope that some of the insight that God has given me from personal experience as I share with you today, in just kind of a very honest and transparent way, will really touch your heart, but really also challenge you to take a look at this issue that I know so many of us often really dread, and we kind of hear that word and we're like, ugh, I don't know. But I really hope that I can attempt to change your mind just a little bit about patience, change your perspective a little bit today. You know, for me, one of the things that God has really been teaching me lately is that patience is all about the gap. Let me explain to you what I mean. You know, for me in my life, and I'm sure for you in your life, we all have situations where God has made a promise to us. He's called us to something. He's told us that something's going to happen. He's given us that assurance. But the time from when he promises us that to the time when he actually delivers that, there's a gap right there in the middle. And there's a gap, and many times we don't know how long, we don't know how wide, we don't know how far that gap reaches. So it's all about the gap. It's all about owning the gap. The time between what God promises and when God delivers. That's what patience is all about. You know, this gap is a gap that I've been living in for several years now. It's a hard season. The gap is not an easy place to be, because so many times when we're in that gap season of our life, you know, whether that's a diagnosis and God says, trust in me, to the time that issue is healed, whether that is a financial problem that you're struggling with, a deadline, a bill, something that you don't know how to take care of, and he says, trust in me, I'm going to provide for you, to when he actually does it or how he actually does it. Whatever that looks like for your life, that gap, everybody's gap looks different, but everybody's gap serves similar purposes. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, is owning the gap and the lessons that we can learn inside those gap seasons of life. You know, for many of us, we talk about waiting, we talk about patience. We look at those things a lot of times as being passive. We look like we're just sitting around, drumming our fingers, waiting for the next thing to happen. But you know, I've come to discover in my life that is very much not the case. Absolutely not. In fact, waiting is often a very active process. In fact, one of the things that I read recently I want to share with you, I read somebody who tweeted out, because I'm a big Twitter person, so someone had tweeted out, patience is not the ability to wait, but how you act while you're waiting. Let me say that again. Patience is not the ability to wait, but how you act while you're waiting. You know, here's the difference between being lazy and having patience. When you're being lazy, you're not acting. You're just sitting. You're just waiting. You're just waiting for the next thing to happen to you, and you're not really doing anything about it. But when you're being patient, you are determined to continue to serve, to continue to move forward, continue to do everything within your power while you're in that season of waiting. It's how you act while you wait that really determines what we get out of the gap. You know, patience is often seen as passiveness, but really I believe that it's a person's restraint. It's the ability to act patient when they don't feel patient. It's that ability to be disciplined through prayer, through Bible study, through trust, that really determines and defines what you and I are going to get out of the gap. I want to share with you some things that I think, 3 things, that I think all of us as LeadHers, as believers, can get out of those gap seasons of life. The first one is endurance. I love what Thomas Carlyle said. He's a famous poet and writer. And he said, endurance is patience concentrated. Isn't that a beautiful picture? Endurance is patience concentrated. recently, and I know some of you guys have seen this on Twitter or on Facebook if you follow me and listen to me kind of talk about not only what God's doing in LeadHer, but also in my personal life sometimes, you will know that over the last year and a half or so, I have really started on a health journey. A journey where I decided for me to do all the things that God had called me to do. I needed to get healthier. I needed to get in better shape. I lost about 70 pounds, which was not an easy process, but it was really a process that developed a lot of endurance in me. Because I remember very, very early on in that process, I woke up one morning and decided that I wanted to become a runner. And so I got up, I strapped on my tennis shoes that I used to mow the lawn and tied them up, and my husband looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go for a run." And he just kind of looked at me like I had two heads, because I had never run as long as he had known me. And I said, I think I want to become a runner. And he's like, "Okay." I said, "I'm going to run a few miles, I'll be back." And he just laughed, and I was offended. I was upset. I'm like, "Do you not think I can run?" He goes, "Well, Christy, I don't think you can run a few miles today." I said, "Oh, sure I can." Well, I had decided I wanted to do a 5K that was coming up. So a couple days before this, I had measured out how far a 5K would be. So I knew that if I ran from my front porch to my church and back again, that was about the distance of a 5K. So that's what I set out to run that morning, the very first morning. Took off down the hill, and I had my headphones in, and my Toby Mac was blaring, and I was trucking along. And I got down there, and I'm running downhill. I'm like, "Oh, this is easy. I'm good." And I kept running, and I kept running. I thought, "Oh, now I'm starting to feel it a little bit," but I thought you're supposed to feel it, right? So I just kept pushing through it and kept pushing through it. Eventually, about 1.5 miles in, I could see the church, and I just pushed with everything I had to get to the church, and I just ran and ran and ran. I literally collapsed on the front steps of that church. I literally collapsed because I had given everything that I had just to get there. And then this amazing thought occurred to me. I still had to get home. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to get home because I wasn't sure I could even stand up, let alone walk 1.5 miles, or run was even not in the question at that point. So I had to suck up my pride. I had to show extreme humility and grab my cell phone and call my husband to come and get me. And he did, and thankfully he didn't rub it in too much. But when I got home that day, he just said 2 things to me. Number 1, you don't have the endurance yet to do this. You've got to build up to it slowly. And number 2, he reminded me that I needed to stretch because I was really going to be sore the next day. And I sat down and I did both of those things. I sat down and first of all researched. How do you train for a 5K? And one of the first things that I read said, don't run the entire thing the first day. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared going into that gap season from when I decided that I wanted to become a runner to when I actually was able to run. The gap season is where I had to develop my endurance. And I had to do it slowly and painfully and clumsily. And it was not pretty many days. But I had to learn to walk and then run a little bit and walk and then run a little bit. And then eventually I was able to run more than I walked. And eventually, just a few weeks ago, I actually completed my first 5K with a group of LeadHers in Springfield, Missouri. And it was really fun. It was really exciting. And I was able to run almost the entire thing. Not quite, but almost. And I did that whole 5K in 35 minutes. And I was so excited as I crossed the finish line. And I just thought, I remember how far I've come. And it was like one of those moments when I made it to the other side of the gap. And I could turn around and look at all of the lessons that God had taught me in the meantime. Endurance. Not just physical endurance either, ladies. God needs us to develop spiritual endurance. He needs us to develop emotional endurance. He needs us to develop the endurance to continue to trust in Him, to continue to have faith in Him, even when things are hard, even when things aren't going our way. You know, here's something else that I've learned about the gap. The time that God makes a promise, the time that we make a decision, to the time that that decision, that promise becomes fulfilled, part of what we get out of the gap is determined by what we put into the gap. For example, for me in our situation right now, it is painful and it is hard and I don't understand why we're still in it. I could choose to put anger and frustration and confusion. I could choose to fill the gap with those emotions. And if I fill the gap with those emotions, what I'm going to get back is going to be bitterness, angriness, ugliness. So instead, I have had to choose to fill the gap season of my life right now with trust, with faith, with obedience. And because those are the things that I am daily pouring into that gap. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know how deep it's going to go. But I know that I've made a decision that this is what I'm going to fill this gap with. Because I've chosen to fill the gap with that, He is developing endurance in me to continue to do that. And the reward that I get out of that is He's delivering back to me peace, joy, patience. I would have never in a million years have thought that in the circumstance that we face today, I would be able to feel joyful and still laugh and still smile. And I'm sure that there are many of you right now that can relate to what I'm saying. I'm sure that there are many of you right now that are facing illnesses, you're facing financial hardships, you're facing potential job loss or loss of your home. Maybe you're facing the loss of a child. Maybe you're facing a marriage that's falling apart or relationships that's deeply, deeply painful. Whatever that looks like for you right now, the time between when God says, trust in me, have faith in me, I will redeem, I will restore, I will work this out for my good. You know, Romans 8:28 tells us that God works all things out for the good of those who love Him, but it doesn't tell us how long it's going to take. That is the promise that defines the gap. That is the promise that tells us, whatever this is over here, I promise you I have a plan and a purpose and I'm going to use it over here. But in the gap, you've got to trust me. You've got to develop that endurance to keep walking with me even when it's hard. I know it's not easy. Trust me. I know it's not easy. But it is so incredibly important that as LeadHers,